The Oracle Network.
We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 16910 means we got shots fired. 4:15 ASF. Route 91 sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter
in mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
Santa Monica police say as many as 6 people are now dead and several others hurt in that shooting, and that number does not include the suspect who was shot to death by police. Shots rang out just before noon today at a neighborhood in Santa Monica and then at Santa Monica College. The college was put on lockdown. It's still on lockdown tonight, 90% cleared so far. The Santa Monica police chief says the shooter first killed 2 people inside a home that was set on fire. He then shot and killed 2 more people a few blocks away, and then another 2 on the college campus. The shooter was killed by police in the library of the college, but someone police are calling a person of interest is in custody right now. Students were studying for final exams when this all happened and were told to evacuate.
On June 7th, 2013, President Barack Obama was scheduled to speak at a private event, which was located at the residence of a local member of the entertainment industry in Santa Monica, California. The whole town was on edge, knowing that the entire city would soon be crawling with police and the president's Secret Service team. When Deborah Fine was driving down a side road, trying to avoid the subsequent heavy traffic, she didn't think anything of it when she saw a man ask the vehicle in front of her to pull over. After all, he was dressed in all black with police written in white lettering on the front of his t-shirt. But this man was not a police officer. Rather, he was a very, very dangerous 24-year-old young man who was determined to wreak havoc on the streets of Santa Monica. His mission would come to a deadly end inside the Santa Monica College Library. At 11:52 a.m. on June 7th, 2013, a 911 call was dispatched, with the caller saying they had just heard gunshots at the corner of Yorkshire Avenue and Kansas Avenue in Santa Monica, California. When the police arrived at the location, they quickly dispatched the fire department to the scene as there was a structure on fire at the corner where the gunshots had been heard. The home was completely engulfed in flames. While the police and fire department were tending to the fire, they had no idea that there was an active shooter on the streets.
There was a guy standing in the street with full SWAT gear on, belt, ammo belt. He looked like a SWAT team member, black from head to toe, and he was coming out of the house, the gate of the house across the street, and then I noticed that house was on fire.
41-year-old Laura Sisk was driving her blue Mazda hatchback when she saw what she thought was a police officer, motioning for her to pull over. Laura followed his commands. Deborah Fine was driving behind Laura, and when she failed to drive forward when the man told her to, he drew up his weapon and aimed his rifle directly at Deborah. Before she could even yell no, he started firing shots at her. Deborah was struck in the left shoulder. She was also struck with various pieces of shrapnel as the shooter continued pulling the trigger, hitting her car. Deborah ducked inside the car and pretended to be dead, hoping to get the shooter to stop shooting at her. Deborah ducked inside the car and pretended to be dead, hoping to get the shooter to stop. While laying towards the center console of her vehicle, Deborah could sense that somebody, presumably the shooter, was walking around her vehicle. She lay as still as she could, until she didn't hear any more noises. A person from a nearby house would eventually come to her rescue and administer first aid until an ambulance arrived.
It was like the perfect storm. I saw a man with a Kevlar vest, looking very much like a SWAT team member. I absolutely thought it had something to do with the fact that Obama was in town. When he absolutely aimed at her and the rifle came up, I knew that that wasn't anything somebody from the police would do. He was absolutely on a mission. Everything had been planned out. He was then just in execute mode. I saw his eyes, I saw him point, and then I knew. Then I knew that he was really going to shoot. And when I heard the explosion and the glass flying, and I felt something throw me to the side, I knew it was a bullet.
After the shooter had thought that he had successfully killed Deborah, he walked back over to Laura's vehicle and opened the passenger side door and got into the car, setting a black duffel bag containing more than 1,500 rounds of ammunition at his feet. He pointed his firearm at Laura and told her to drive. As long as she followed his directions, he said he wouldn't kill her. Obviously, Laura was absolutely terrified, but she followed his directions. The shooter was calm and quiet while in the vehicle, only speaking when he wanted her to turn onto a different street. Laura was crying and shaking, while the shooter continued to tell her to calm down and keep driving. After driving a little ways, the car came up beside bus 4057 from the Big Blue Bus Company, which was being driven by Lachelle Barr. There were approximately 24 passengers on the bus. Both the Mazda and bus were stopped at a red light at an intersection. Lachelle had looked out of her window and noticed that there was something hanging from the back window of the blue Mazda that was in the lane next to hers, on the left side of the street. She hollered at the driver to try and get the driver's attention, to let her know that there was something in her window. The driver never acknowledged Lachelle, so she decided to beep her horn a couple of times. Out of nowhere, gunshots started firing at the bus. All of the passengers, as well as Lachelle, dove for the floor to take cover from the hail of bullets.
I tried waving to get the passengers' attention. I tapped my horn a few times. You have something hanging there. And then he opened the door. I just remember a white man in all black with squared off chest in SWAT gear. And he just raised his rifle and started shooting through the window.
Lachelle knew that she had to get her and her passengers out of this deadly situation, and fast. From the floor, she jumped up into her driver's seat, threw the bus in drive, and floored her accelerator to get out of the gunfire. She was able to get her bus out of the line of fire and to safety. 3 people had been injured on her bus, but because of the quick thinking of Lachelle Barr, she had saved every single person's life on her bus that day. After the shooter had fired at the bus multiple times, he instructed Laura to continue driving, and terrified, she complied. As the two were approaching the intersection of Pico Boulevard and Cloverfield Avenue, the shooter told Laura to stop in the middle of the intersection. Laura followed his instructions and stopped the vehicle, and the shooter got out and started firing his weapon at random. He was standing in the middle of the intersection, firing bullets, spinning around in a circle while pulling the trigger.
He looked at me, and then he just panned over with his gun, and I jumped out of the way, and he shot at me. I heard probably another 3 or 4 single shots, and then just a barrage of firing. He just seemed very calm. He wasn't fidgety, he wasn't moving around a whole lot. He just was standing there, like, panning around, looking, like, I'm looking for targets.
During this time, many businesses had called 911 to let them know that they heard gunshots and didn't know what to do. They were advised to stay in their buildings until further order. As the shooting was happening, the president was no more than 2 miles away. Police and dispatch were perplexed. They didn't know if this was a diversion to keep the police busy, so someone could get at the president, or maybe it was gang-related. It wasn't clear how many shooters there were, because it seemed that the crime scene just kept moving. They didn't know what to think at this point. After the shooter finished firing at the intersection, he got back into Laura's Mazda and instructed her to drive to Santa Monica College. As she drove towards the college, the shooter continued to shoot bullets out the window at random. He told her to drive to a parking lot at the college. Once she was at parking lot 1, she put the car in park and the shooter exited the vehicle and told her that she is free to go as her job was now done. Frightened, she drove away as fast as she could until she saw a police officer. She put the car in park and ran over to him to report what just happened.
911 emergency.
I was just kidnapped by the machine gun man at Santa Monica College. He made me drive and they pointed a machine gun at me and got in my car.
Okay, where are you now?
I'm at the Palm Motel at Chevron.
I'm going to have an officer meet you there, okay? Stay on the phone.
Okay.
The shooter began to walk across parking lot 1 at Santa Monica College, randomly firing his weapon at different cars. A red Ford Explorer was driving near the shooter. He held up his rifle, aimed at the driver, and pulled the trigger, and also shot the passenger of the Explorer. The driver lost control of the vehicle, and it came to a stop when it crashed into a brick wall near the parking lot.
I live right next door to Santa Monica College, and I was in my kitchen window looking out, and I heard the gunshots and saw the car swerve and crash through the wall. And I ran out there, and police just started pulling up and yelling at everybody to get out, and students were running by screaming, and I was pretty shook up.
After leaving the parking lot, the shooter headed towards the liberal arts building. Before entering the building, he dropped off his duffel bag right outside the doors and continued in. There were over 300 people, both students and staff, inside the building, and all of them were later interviewed by the police and reported that they had been shot at. After leaving the liberal arts building, the shooter headed towards the library, where about 100 students were studying for their upcoming final exams. Before entering the library, he would shoot and kill a 68-year-old female who was outside the library collecting recyclables to return for extra money. The students had little to no advance warning that there was a shooter on the college campus, which didn't give them very much time to react. Several students and staff were able to hide in a closet where their money and safe was kept, and they locked the door. The shooter yelled at the terrified group saying that he was a police officer and needed everyone to come out. Every person stood silent, frozen with fear. Just a few seconds later, he opened fire and started shooting at the closet doors. Bullets were hitting the wall and drywall, ricocheting every which way. Miraculously, no one was killed or injured. While the shooter was inside, terrorizing the staff and students, Sergeant Raymond Bottenfield from the Santa Monica Campus Police Department was just outside the library. It was his day off, but he had come onto the campus that morning to attend a meeting. He wasn't in a police uniform, nor did he have his bulletproof vest on. He didn't even have his service weapon on him. All he had was his off-duty personal firearm, which was a lot less powerful than his on-duty service weapon. After hearing gunshots, a loud crash, and police radio dispatch reporting shots fired at the college, he decided to pursue the situation to see what he could do to help. Though he didn't know it at the time, the loud crash he heard was the red Ford Explorer hitting the brick wall. When Sergeant Bottenfield approached the college, he had met up with 2 other officers who worked for the Santa Monica Police Department, Officer Jason Salas and Officer Robert Sparks. The 3 officers had recently attended an active shooter training. Though they didn't know each other, they still had the training to know what to do in the case of this situation. After the shooting at Columbine High School in 1999, police officers were taught to pursue the threat and ultimately eliminate it. They were trained to diamond up, or create a diamond formation where there is 1 officer in the front, 2 on the sides, and 1 in the back facing backward, so that all sides